Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out today to come. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mirette Mabrouk, with a low voice, chronic. I direct the Egypt and Horn of Africa program here. We are extremely lucky to have Ambassador Zahran because we've been chasing him down for a bit. He's a little busy, as you can imagine. Let me just start by saying really quickly, we're not going to do bios and stuff. Everyone can access the bio. We will jump straight into this. Anybody who wants to ask a question, I'm sure you all know the drill, just flip your nameplate over and I'll take the questions in the order in which they come. One assumes that more quote-unquote interesting questions may slide over into the second half, but please just feel free to ask anything you want at any time. Perhaps you might get a fuller answer in the second half, but we'll see. We're going to go straight into this. Anybody with any questions, please just ask. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to ask the ambassador for a few prepared remarks, and then we'll go into the questions.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mirette, for your kind invitation. Always a pleasure to be here in the midst of your scholars and experts. It's always a pleasure to be back here at the MEI. I've been here a couple of times, and once with our former foreign minister, Sameh Shukri, who has just left his office. There's a new foreign minister now, and who was a colleague who had served here in Washington before, Dr. Badr Abdelati, and he knows everything about Washington and the US-Egypt relationship, which also makes our job either easier or much more difficult. So I hope it's on the easier side, and I'm sure it is. Well, this is an opportunity, once again, colleagues, to maybe shed some light on Egypt and US-Egypt relations. And of course, in the midst of everything that's happening in our part of the world, which is nothing new except of the longevity of the war we're seeing right now in Gaza. These sorts of challenges, as they happen and occur in our part of the world, have always had a time cap. This time round seems open-ended, and in itself poses a huge challenge not only to the region but also beyond the region, as it affects everyone. Egypt, of course, is in the midst of all this. Egypt is at crossroads between three continents: Africa, Asia, and Europe, with the Suez Canal vein that helps and assists and is probably essential for the continuation of global trade at the levels that we've seen in the past, and we are somehow seeing lesser today because of the nature of the challenges when it comes to first COVID, then the war in Ukraine, and now the war in Gaza, and of course added to the war in Gaza the complexities of what we see across the Red Sea when it comes to skirmishes and attacks that are launched from one end to the other, and the effect that has on the normal navigation into the Red Sea and the Suez Canal to the rest of the world. There's an Egypt in the midst of all this, an Egypt that is considered to be the most, and is actually the most populous country in the region, with over 105 million today, and maybe the number is even more than that. You will find an Egypt that is in the heart of the Arab world, an Egypt that has always had a say in what happens in the region and continues to do so, even though others have augmented to a level to play a much bigger role, which does not diminish from the role of Egypt being at the center, incumbent on Egypt by virtue of history and geography, but also an Egypt that is a springboard into Africa when it comes to trade and the trade agreements it enjoys with all the African continent, and as a springboard and as a, and let me just say, a bridge between Europe and Africa both ways. That is the Egypt we have. We have another important element in Egypt, which is a young population, a population that has 60% under the age of 30, which also gives it youth and agility, and also an Egypt that continues to be the third largest in terms of the economy, in terms of the size of the economy in the Middle East. So this is the credentials of Egypt, and one important part when it comes to U.S.-Egypt relations is its other credential, which is most important when we look at the Egypt that has initiated the whole peace drive in the region. We have an Egypt that has planted the seeds of peace, that has been the trailblazer, has been the pathfinder, and has been at the helm of efforts in order to have peace to reign, and hence the relationship with the United States that has augmented in its level, but has also widened in the scope of every single issue to be dealt with in terms of the strategic, advancing the strategic relationship, advancing the interests of both countries, the United States being a global power and Egypt being a regional player to be reckoned and to be as such an important partner in everything we try to do in the region. So this is where we are in this relationship. We continue to work in tandem and focused on bilateral issues with the United States, bilateral issues in terms of advancing our strategic dialogue. We have a strategic dialogue that will be resuming very soon, maybe in fall, or maybe next year. It depends on how we proceed internally here in the US, but basically one that is cemented, one that has not been affected by change of administrations here in Washington. Neither has it been affected by any changes that happened in Egypt during the past a decade or so. So we continue to enjoy the strength of this relationship, and we continue to be able to forge new areas of partnering, whether it is in the economic or social or cultural, as well as, of course, political and military. And the military aspects and the military cooperation here between both countries is the backbone of this relationship. But however, the challenges we face have, when it comes to either terror or when it comes to the security challenges in our region, brings both countries always together on the same page with different ideas, but at the end of the day, agreements always surface towards resolution of conflicts. Egypt, of course, one other thing that I would like to mention is, and as I described the Egypt of today, if you look at the map, you will find Egypt facing the eye of the storm, or the perfect storm, and each and every corner around Egypt is either a conflict, a military conflict, or an internal struggle of any nature, or a political or social upheaval, whether it is Libya or Sudan or Gaza or elsewhere. And as such, the foundations that Egypt has always stuck to when it comes to its political stances on different conflicts is basically the same. When I look at Libya or Syria or Sudan or any other conflict in the region or beyond the region, you will find basic tenets that guide Egyptian positions, basically upholding the notions of a nation state. And the nation state, with its institutions and with its ability to keep itself coherent as a country, as a nation, without entering into the slippery slope of either disintegrating or continued struggles that would only affect and have adverse effects on the countries involved and the vicinity. And of course, Egypt, in the midst of all this, has a lot to do and has a lot of challenges to face. So let me just maybe pause and open up with Mirette, of course, her questions and yours on specifics when it comes to the different issues at hand. And thank you again for having me today.
Thank you so much. Like we said, anybody with questions, please just let us know. All right, Ambassador, thank you so much for all that. I'm going to jump straight into, I think, the issue that is first and foremost on everyone's mind at the moment. It certainly sucks up most of the oxygen in the room. Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu was at Congress yesterday, and one of the things that he mentioned was that Israel had allowed in over 40,000 trucks of aid to Gaza. The UN says that it's actually just over 28,000, which is significantly less than the population of Gaza needs. Again, without going into an enormous amount of specifics, let me ask about Egypt's role in this. Egypt had been a primary port of three-way transportation for aid. That came to a halt when Israel entered Rafah. Now, at the moment, we have a tiny trickle, just over 2,000, according to the UN, of trucks entering through Kerem Shalom. Why is Egypt no longer allowing aid through the Rafah port? Is Egypt allowing, I mean, is there a mistake somewhere? Is Egypt going through Rafah? Is aid going through Rafah? If not, why not? How long is this going to continue?
Well, thank you, Mirette. I think it's a very pertinent question and very timely as well. We have had the Prime Minister here yesterday of Israel, who had made a statement in Congress, and he had a long discourse, and part of it was the numbers you've referred to. I will not comment on these numbers, and as you've mentioned, the UN itself has had other numbers. But what, to your specific question, why have we, as Egypt, not been able to operate the Rafah crossing as it should have, or as it had been? And basically, we have the scale of this conflict, the magnitude of it, the intensity of it has rendered the Rafah crossing inoperable, simply put, inoperable and dysfunctional. We've seen military operations in Rafah, but not only in Rafah. We've cautioned against Rafah, but we've also cautioned against the crossing itself and coming closer to the crossing because of the impact on the crossing itself being the one of the many crossings that join Gaza with Israel and Egypt. So we have one crossing. And that crossing has been operating on a very difficult, in very difficult circumstances, but it was nevertheless operating. The military operations in Rafah and at the crossing itself from the Palestinian side has basically rendered the whole region into a military zone. And as such, the inability to use the crossing as it had been used in the past and the past. And what we've seen is an accumulation of trucks on the Egyptian side of the border that were unable to cross into Rafah, bearing in mind that the Rafah crossing itself was initially a crossing for personnel and not for aid, and not for convoys of trucks going in and out. But we've nevertheless, because of the intensity of the situation, because of the sufferings on the other side, and the need to augment levels of humanitarian aid into Gaza, we've managed to alter the nature of the crossing, and we've in fact endured a series of shellings on the other side of the crossing that have basically rendered it not only inoperable but dysfunctional as a whole. So that is a quick answer to your question. But the other question that you might think of, or anyone around the table, well, why don't you use the other crossing? And the other crossing, which is Karam Abu Salim. And Karam Abu Salim is a crossing that is between Gaza and Israel. It's not a crossing that Egypt has control over. However, we've been able to use the crossing between Egypt and Israel to have trucks enter into Israel. The vetting process itself on the Israeli side has been very cumbersome in terms of trucks moving from the north of Sinai to the south, to mid Sinai, to cross into Israel through a crossing by the name of Nitzana, مش كده ولا أنا غلطان؟ Nitzana. And when it enters into Israel, the vetting process starts inside Israel, and when the Israelis are satisfied with the trucks and the goods that it carries, it goes back into Egypt and then up to the Rafa Crossing and enters. When the Rafa Crossing has been rendered dysfunctional, they crossed into Israel and waited in Israel itself for the Israelis to have them enter into the crossing of Karam Abu Salim into Gaza itself. And that in itself was very cumbersome and was very costly and very time consuming. And not to mention that 75% of whatever went to Israel into the vetting process was actually denied entry into Gaza, which went back into Egypt. And that in itself was and continues to be problematic.
All right, thank you. I have a lot more questions, but I see that we've started with the questions. Faraz, speak.
Thank you. صباح الخير سعادة السفير. فراس مقصد, Senior Fellow and Senior Director at MEI. We're all operating here under the strict guidelines of Mirette and Brian. So I've got a couple of questions categorized into interesting and less interesting. I'll start with the less interesting in the open session and save the interesting one for later. You referenced the Red Sea. You referenced the Red Sea a couple of times. Obviously, what's happening with the Houthis interjecting and intercepting global shipping, through that has a significant impact on the Egyptian economy. I believe the revenues from the canal are estimated to be down about 50% at this point. This is something that strikes at the heart of Egyptian national interest. And so my question to you is, what is Egypt doing to reverse course and reverse the current reality and challenge in the Red Sea? Given, of course, we all know the history between Egypt and Yemen and why in the previous iteration of this conflict, when Saudi Arabia and the UAE were involved, there was hesitancy for Egypt to get involved itself. But now this is much more of a direct challenge to your country's national interests. So I'm hoping you could tell us a bit more about that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This, I think, is a very important question because it brings to the forefront the heart of the whole issue here, which is basically an objective that we all had from the very beginning for non-spillovers. And as this war continues and as it intensifies, you will only see much more happening in terms of risks of a wider war, and other fronts coming into play. And we see this with Lebanon, we see this with Hezbollah, and we see this with the Yemen and the Houthis in Yemen. Of course, it affects us tremendously. We've had a decline of over 50%, and some numbers indicate 60%. Last year we had a 25% decline. And this year, so far, we have somewhere in the vicinity of 50 to 60%. And that, of course, is a huge national security issue because of the revenues that we depend on in terms of our GDP and in terms of our continued growth and reform programs and our expansion when it comes to our economy and our partnerships with our partners in around, whether in the Arab region or in Europe and beyond. What are we doing? we're basically intensifying our efforts. Two things, let me say. Intensifying our efforts to bring about a ceasefire. The prospects of which seem to be, a mirage today after what we've heard yesterday. And that is unfortunate because every single effort that we've deployed and exerted has somehow been either dismissed or has somehow been intentionally, subsiding. But we won't be losing hope. We will just continue to work as hard as we can as mediators with the United States, with Qatar as well, with all the efforts geared towards reaching a ceasefire, or at least a period of calm that would allow for hostages to be out, for detainees to be out, for a semi-permanent ceasefire to come into place, or a period of tranquility that would allow for reconstruction and would allow for the other measures that we look forward to achieve. The other flip of what we're doing is messaging. We're messaging. We're sending out very strong messages that reach the Houthis in Yemen, but also messaging Iran. And our messages are very in concert, let me say, with other messages that are coming around, even from the United States here, pointing to the same direction, which is basically, putting horses, pulling back horses, and putting other ulterior intentions or motives aside, or shelving them, for us not to enter into this slippery slope of a wider conflict that would flare up the whole region more than it already is right now. So this is what we're doing. Anything else we have been, pursuing is, points to this same direction, whether it is in our contacts with our brethren in the Arab world, for them also who have open channels, direct channels of communication and relations with Iran itself, because of the nature of what's happening. We have elements operating throughout the region who somehow tend to, get their directions from Tehran, and our brethren in the Arab world have also been sending out these messages from the United States as well. But also, when it comes to pacifying their own situation, basically flared by the continued military operations in Gaza. So if you want to put all this at bay, we know what to do.